Ever wondered how to resurrect legendary guitar tone from the past? Today, we're taking on that very challenge. We're taking a look at the FAL Treble Booster circuit, and we're going to be transposing that to Tagboard. Legend has it that Ritchie Blackmore used this pedal from 1972 all the way through to the mid-70s and the Rainbow era. Will this vintage gem roar back to life? Let's find out. Where to start with transposing this Vero layout onto Tagboard? Well, first of all, I've made this. It's just a tiny little layout on my screen with some dots on it, and the dots are going to denote the tags on a Tagboard. Now, the Vero layout comes from tagboardeffectsblogspot.com. If you search FAL Treble Booster circuit, you'll find this. No problem. There's two versions. There's a 1967 version and a 1969 version. I've chose the 1967 version just because it's older, and we all know older means better. Anyway, so 1967 version, we can see it on my screen right now. We'll see that it's also a positive ground circuit, which is really no good to us. We want to put this in a regular enclosure and put it on a pedal board, because who doesn't want pedals on a pedal board? Losers. Anyway, but we'll make this work on a regular pedal board. The best place to start, I find, is with a transistor or an op-amp or the main part of the circuit. And as this is a small circuit, the heart of this circuit is the vintage germanium transistor, and that's where we're going to start. So if we go to our drawing, edit. Now, as you can see on the screen, I've got absolutely tons of tags here, and I'm probably not going to need all of them, but you know, we can have them all in there. It doesn't matter. We'll just delete as appropriate or add as appropriate. Who knows? Now, our transistor, it may look like a beetle, but it's actually a transistor. It has legs that are collector, base, emitter. Now, I'm going to write them in there. I'll probably pick red and then collector, base, emitter. Now, I've gone that way round because on our Vero layout, I can see the collectors on one side and the emitters on the other. So we've got the same pin out, is what we call pin out on a transistor. It's what I use the DCA 55 Atlas tester to ascertain. Basically, when we're testing our transistors, we'll use that machine and we'll know which leg goes where. It's essential. Now, to start with this, I'm going to start one side of the transistor and I'm going to pick the collector. And if I follow the little copper strip along, I can see that there's only two components attached to the collector. One is a 47 NF output cap. So I'm going to add that in. So we go to our drawing, and I think for caps, I'm going to go blue. Why not? And the way that cap's positioned, it looks like nothing else attaches to it and it goes straight out. So I'm going to pick the tag next to the collector. I mean, you can pick any tag really where you're going to run it. That's going to be my 47 NF cap. Fine. What else is attached to it? Let's go back, follow the line across. We can see that there's a 4.7k resistor. Now that 4.7k to me looks like it attaches to the 9-volt supply. And I'm going to put that on the opposite side of the tagboard just because, why not? And I'm going to put it on the far left tag just because that makes sense to me. I read left to right. It seems like a reasonable place to put it. So if I'm going to go teal for my resistors. Why not? So if we add in our 4.7k resistor, God, my drawing's terrible, apologies, 4.7k resistor, and then we go back and have a look, there's definitely nothing else attached to the collector. So it's time to move on to the base. That's the next one along. The base is in the center, and if we follow it along, we can see there's a 68k resistor right here, then there's a 10k resistor right here, and then there's a 100 NF cap right here. Now the 68k resistor, that attaches to negative 9 volts, which for us is going to be positive, but that doesn't matter. It attaches to our 9-volt power supply. The 10k attaches to ground, to earth. I know people hate me saying earth, but I'm going to keep saying it. I've explained this before. A warship is sat in water, and we call every negative earth. It's just what we do. Simplicity. So that attaches to ground. Then we have a 100 NF cap. If we follow that along, we can see that attaches to our input. Now, the input cap makes a massive difference on the circuit. So later on, maybe we could do some tomfoolery with that, try and get a bit more tones out of it. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So to start off with, I'm going to add in the 68k resistor, simply because as I follow the line across from the base, that's the first component I come to. Now the 68k resistor goes to 9 volts. So I'm going to add it in next to our 4.7k resistor. It comes from the base and it goes to our 9 volts. And that is 68k. Wow. I think my 5-year-old daughter will probably be able to draw this better. Anyway, 68k. What else is attached to the base? So our input cap. I'm going to add the input cap in next because I know that's a big cap and I want it to sit straight on the tag board. So from the base, I want it to come straight across the tag board and drop into the tag opposite here. Just because I know, no, I don't know. I think that will look better on the tag board. I mean, it's up to you. You could run it at a diagonal if you really want to, but I'm going to run it straight across. So next up is going to be our 100 NF cap. So I'll go back to my royal blue colour. I've just come to a problem. If I add this cap going straight down like I probably should do, then I'm going to have some trouble here because there's going to be a tag left over. And if we also think, where is our 10k going to? Our 10k is going to ground, as we've seen. So if I was to run ground to this point here, center, and put the cap here, that means that I'm going to be able to attach other components to these tags here and then just link them to ground, because I can see on the circuit already, if we have a look, there's at least 1, 2, there's 3, 4 components go to ground. So I'm probably going to need that space to fit them in. It's up to you. You could run a wire under the board to attach all the grounds together. It's completely up to you. But if we go back again, I'm going to change my mind and I'm going to run my input cap, so our 100 NF cap, from here to the next tag along. It will run at a bit of a diagonal, which I think will look worse on the circuit board. On the circuit board? What am I talking about? Let's never say them words again. Tag board. It'll look worse on the tag board, but I feel like it's going to be easier for me to manage once we get into it. And as we said, that is our input. Can you believe that the Hello Sailor Effects official channel hit 4,500 subscribers? Thank you so much to everyone who subscribed. I really appreciate you all watching my videos. If you want to support the show further than just watching the videos, please follow the link below and have a look at my website where I have all of my custom pedals for sale. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the 10k resistor that comes from the base. Let's check it. Check twice, cut once, all of that. That saying comes from, and I know I've probably said this before, but it comes from damage control. So on board a warship, if we get hit by anything, probably a modern missile, it destroys to bits. If we get hit by something and we can survive, like the Falklands War, we usually saw up 2x4 timber, put it all in place, and you know, plug up holes with timber basically. And the rule is you measure your timber twice and then you only have to cut it once. And in a heat of battle, it never quite works. But anyway, that's why I say measure twice, cut once. So let's look again. Our base, if we follow this line along this copper strip, we can see it goes to this 10k resistor that goes to ground. So I'm going to add that one in next. We'll go back to our teal colour, add our resistor in. That is going to go straight down. Now I've actually got some pretty cool 10k resistors that I can use there, maybe some carbon comp or something. I'm already thinking I've got some cool components for that. Anyway, there's our 3 components added in for the base. So what's next? Now if I look at the emitter, I can see that there are 2 components attached to this copper strip. First one we come to is a 1k resistor that goes straight to ground. And the next one we come to is a 25 microfarad cap that also goes straight to ground. So for me, if we go back to our drawing, I could, in this area here, I could probably add in our 1k resistor and our 25 microfarad cap to this tag here, and then simply link this tag to here, which I know is going to be ground. So first of all, before we go on, we've got our teal up, so let's add our 1k resistor in. 1k. I will draw this neater so when we're building it, you're not working off this chicken scratch scrollings or whatever the hell this thing is. But this is just fleshing it out. You can make it neater later on. Right, so we're up to our 1k going to here. And don't forget, we want to link them together so it's going to ground. Now we're on to our electrolytic capacitor, which is polar. Now, the way this is set up, on this drawing here, where it says ground actually means 9-volt supply, because it's a positive ground effect. This is actually going to be ground for us. It is going to be the earth. So we want to put the earth of our capacitor facing earth. So this 25 microfarad cap, we're going to have to flip it round and face it the opposite direction. So when I draw it, I'm going to go back to my blue colour and I draw my 25, overshot there, didn't I? 25 microfarad cap, but I'm going to make sure that the negative is this side and the positive is this side. And that means that it's the opposite way round to our Vero board layout, but don't forget we're going to be switching our power around, so we will have it the opposite way round. What else have we missed? So that's all of our components that are attached to our transistor. What I like to do then is go back to our drawing, count how many components we've put in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now if we go back to the Vero board layout, how many components are actually there, and then we'll know if we've missed any. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right, so now we know we've missed the components, we can look. And a quick glance tells me that there are 2 electrolytic caps, and I've only added 1. So simply, there's an electrolytic cap that I haven't added in. And if I look here, I know I've put the 25 microfarad in going to ground. There's also a 100 microfarad cap going from the ground all the way up to the 9 volts. Now this is just to filter the power supply. You could add this off board, you can make your own little power supply filter, which I always do anyway, on top of the filtering on a circuit, and I probably will in this circuit as well. But we're going to add this cap in because it's on the board. Now if I go back to our drawing, there really is no way that I can add, using tags, a cap going to 9 volts from here, because it's stretching over everything. I've got 2 choices. I can mount it off board somewhere below here, which is what I do on my Range Masters, and probably what I'm going to do on this. Or for the sake of this drawing, we can add in a 100 microfarad cap here, and then we can just add on the negative this side, so then we can link it together there and it'll attach to our negative, and we can just write 9 volts here, and remember that we have to run a wire from here to 9 volts on our circuit. In actual fact, when I build this, I'm probably just going to run the cap from here over to here, and that means that I will only use 1, 2, 3, 4 tags. That'll make the tag board quite small, which means that I can condense the size of the enclosure, and I know you guys hate me building in large enclosures, so it kind of works. Right, is there anything else that we've missed on this? I don't believe there is, although thinking about it, this 68k resistor, we could change that for a 100k trim pot, and that would mean that we can bias our transistor exactly how we want to bias it, or hoping whatever FAL had in mind for the biasing. FAL, I think that stands for Future Audio Limited. Don't quote me on that one, pretty sure it is. But anyway, Future Audio Limited, I don't know what their transistors were. I think they were using OC72s. Who knows? And now if I was to put an OC72 in here, there's such a wide range of leakages and gains. On the drawing, we can see it just says PNP germanium. So I'm going to look through my stash and find a good one, low leakage, and you know, maybe around 70 to 200 for the HFE, just because that's what goes in my treble boosters. And I think if it goes in my treble boosters, it may work well in this. But to bias it, I've got 2 choices. I can either change this 4.7k resistor to a 5k trim pot, or the 10k trim pot, or I can change this 68k resistor to a 100k trim pot. And that's what I think I'm going to do. So if we go to our drawing here, this 68k resistor that is in the middle here, I think I'm going to change that to a trim pot, but we'll see. Now, let's get it drawn up so it's not Joe age 5, and we'll get a tag board out and lay out some components. And here's all the components we're going to be working with today. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've got this new massive soldering mat. I'm well happy with it. If you're interested in this huge thing, please follow the link in the description. It'll take you through to the Amazon store, where I will get a small kickback, but there's no added charge to yourself. I mean, look at the size of this thing. Anyway, my old one was just getting a little bit too grubby, so I upgraded. Now let's just walk through the components. First of all, actually, before we walk through the components, I'll show on the screen now the updated drawing, which is a little bit neater, but it's exactly the same as what we drew together. This is what I'm going to be working from. And from left to right, let's go through the components. On the left hand side, you can see a 47 NF cap. I'm using this ITT cap. I really like these ones, so I'll be using that. Then we have a 4.7K resistor, which is going to be this Carbon Comp 4.7K vintage. Why not? Now the 68K resistor, we did discuss this. I'm going to change it for this trim pot. It's a 100K Iskra trim pot. That's what I'm going to be using for this, just so then I can bias my transistor. The input cap is 100 NF. Now my plan is to add in a switch, first mod by the way, to add in a switch to give it a few more tones. So I'm going to use a 6.8 NF resistor, what am I saying? 6.8 NF capacitor. I'm using this mustard cap. This is what I'm going to use for the input, and then I'm going to add on a switch. I'll show you how to wire this in. Two other settings. So one of them settings will be 100 NF, and another one may well be something like 22 NF, and we'll get a few more sounds out of it. Hopefully, I'm not sure, but stay around to the end and you'll get to see how to implement that. I've also got one more bag of tricks up my sleeve, another mod that I'd like to do to this. Now, next along is a 10K resistor. I'm using this. It's the same ones that Marcus Reeves uses, and I would definitely put my hand in the fire if that man did too, for tonal reasons, of course. Then we have our 1K resistor, which is going to be this. This is actually an outer spec 1.1K resistor from Dale. I'm using this because I think it'll look cool, no other reason. Then our 25 microfarad electrolytic capacitor there, and then also on the outside edge we've got our 100 microfarad electrolytic cap. I'm using this old ITT cap. I haven't picked the transistor yet. I figured we could do that together later on, so stick around for that. So to start off with, we're going to go with our 4-piece tag board because we're only using up 4 tags, and I'm going to start left to right as ever. And the first component I'm going to add in is our 4.7K resistor, which is this one. I will clean the legs, and even though the legs aren't that bad, I will clean the legs as usual. And it goes between the bottom left tag on the tag board and then up to the collector tag, which is the second one along on the top on our drawing. Now usually I'd straighten that out, but maybe I'm going to leave space for our output cap to go in here. So I'm only going to, I can't even solder in the bottom tag here because we have another resistor going in this bottom left tag. So next up is going to be our output cap, which is this 447 NF or 0.047 microfarad capacitor. All I'm going to do with this one is bend one leg in, then I can measure it up against the tags, bend it back out again so I know it's the right size, and now this should slot in nicely here like this. Now I can solder both of them tags because I know that going into this tag here there's just our 4.7K resistor and this cap, and this tag here is just our 47 NF output cap. So I'm going to go ahead and solder all three of and solder these 2 points here. I'm not going to solder that one just yet. There's our 47 NF cap soldered in and our 4.7K resistor soldered one end. Next up is going to be our 68K resistor, which I'm using this trim pot for. Actually, speaking of soldering, just look at the space between my my solder and my wire is all the way over here because the size of this mat. I never quite took that into account when I was buying this. I love it. Bigger is always better. You heard it here first, folks. Bigger is better. And this mat's massive. It's just proper human in me. Anyway, so you'll notice that our trim pot has 3 legs, but our resistors only have 2 legs. The leg on its own is known as the wiper, and that sits in the center of this pot, and it attaches on a carbon track between these 2 points, and it either attaches to this point more or it attaches to this point more. And in between on a carbon track is resistance. So what we're going to do is we're going to snip off one of these legs. And that means that now we've got resistance between this leg and this leg on our carbon track without having this other leg in there. We don't need it. And that's what we're going to use. That'll become our resistor. And then when we adjust this, we'll adjust the resistance of this from 68k to maybe, I don't know what it's going to end up as. And that will bias our germanium transistor. Now, let me take a look. So to do this, normally what I would do is save some component legs, and then I can use them to fashion or extend the legs on this so it will reach both points. However, I haven't saved any component legs, which is magical. But I know that this, I mean, you could use that. I've got some uncoated wire. You could use that, and there is a link in the description to buy the uncoated wire if you wish to do so. And again, I'll get an Amazon affiliates link kickback, but I'm just going to snip some of that leg off and use that. And what I'm going to do is I'll make a hook out of that leg, and I have shown this before, I realise before someone tells me, and I'm going to attach that to this leg here. Like so. I'll make a hook out of this leg, and then when we put them together, marry them up, we can give them a crimp with our Nipex snips, give them a little squeeze. I don't think I'm ever going to make a video without saying how amazing these Nipex snips are. Apologies for that. Right, and then when that's on, we can just give that a solder. So, bit of a wet the tip, and then solder them two together. There. Now you can run some heat shrink over the top of that if you wanted to. I don't think I'm going to bother right now, because there's not going to be all that much on this circuit to get in the way of it. Now we could extend this leg as well and lift it all up off the board and put it out the way. That would be great, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to bend this leg in a 90-degree fashion like that, and then I'm going to push that through this lug right here. So if I bend this leg out like so, we've now made our resistor. This goes through. Where does this one go through? Oh dear. Yeah, this one goes through the base, which is going to be this pin here, the third pin along on the top, and then it's also going to go into our first pin on the bottom, like so. And then we can bend it out the way, and all it'll do is sit there like that. We can lift it up out the way in a second. I'll just solder this end to keep it in place. Then what we want to do is we want to lift it up enough so then it's not touching our carbon comp resistor, this end. So it's all about, this is where actually it would have been probably handy to put some sheathing over this leg just to stop it from being an issue. Well done, Joe. Maybe I'll sit it up right there. Okay, so it's sitting up a little bit. It's out the way of that resistor. We can see that the legs aren't touching each other down here, which is good. Tidy this end up. Good. Now what's next in line? Next in line is going to be our 100 NF cap. We're not using the 100 NF because we're going to add a switch. If we remember, we are indeed using this 6.8 NF. This is going to be our treble boost setting, if you like. I mean, you could mount this to the switch. I'm sure there'll be someone saying, why not mount it to the switch? Keep it off the board and keep the board from being congested. Yeah, absolutely, but I'm not going to do that. I like to bend the legs over on these because they're quite a big component, gets in the way, and then bend them in on themselves like so, and then bend them back out to lift the components off the board and keep it out the way of all the other components because it's rather large. And we all know that big capacitors sound better, so there's that. Now this will go through the base of our transistor, which is the third pin along again, and then it will go into the second pin along on our bottom row. Now if we look at our bottom row, we can see that there's nothing else going into that pin, so I can actually solder that. So let's solder that in place. There we are, and then with a quick tidy with our Nipex snips, we can then manipulate that cap to sit straight on the board. I don't know why, but it really soothes my soul to know that to have them sitting straight just looks better in my mind. Now, the last component to go into this base position, the third pin along on our drawing, is a 10k resistor. And I've got this. And this is just going to slot right underneath that capacitor. Nice and easy. It will just slot straight under here. What I like to do is push the resistor right the way to the end, take a snip of the leg, and then just poke that through the tag and position the resistor somewhere near the center. Now that resistor is the only component going into this bottom tag, and it is the last component going into our top row, so I can go ahead and solder them in. Next we're on to the fun stuff. It is of course our 25 microfarad cap and our 1k resistor. So our 25 microfarad cap, we need to make sure is orientated the correct way round. Now this little dimple in the cap denotes that this side is the positive side, and because if you remember back to when we drew our drawing, we put the positive side pointing towards the emitter and the negative side going to this pin here, which is going to be our negative side of the circuit. It's going to be our earth. So if I add that in that way round now, there. Now it is getting a little bit congested, and I should have really just added another tag on the end and added this into that other tag, but whatever. I'm going to add that in to the same tags. This is our 1k resistor now, into the same tags as the 25 microfarad cap. And again, as I've said in other videos, if you have trouble using your snips to manipulate your components, please use the flat nose pliers, because then there's no chance of you snipping the component while you're trying to work with it. I've done this several million times and find it easier to use the Nipex snips. We can solder both ends of this in because there's no other component going in there. Like so. Now the last component is this, is our 100 microfarad cap. And if we go back to our drawing, we can see it goes from the 9 volt on the left hand side, bottom row, to the negative on the right hand side. And all I'm going to do is just clean the component legs, because this is an old one and they are absolutely filthy, and that will affect our solder joint or create a problem with the solder joint, should I say. Right, now we want to make sure that our positive end, which is the dimple, and handily on this one it has actual arrows with a positive sign on pointing to the positive end, is pointing towards the positive, and our negative end is pointing towards the negative. Now you want to show, usually best practice, that well-known saying, you want to put the voltage rating and the value of the capacitor pointing upwards. For me, I like to put the brand pointing upwards. It just so happens that both of them are on the same side on this one, so that's good. Now I'm going to add that through these holes here, the outside edge, and I'm going to make sure that it sits quite high off the board, so then it's out the way, because I'm going to add in some other components and stuff. Other components, I'm going to add in some other wires, going in here, because we've got our input and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and solder that. And that. So frustrating to not blow your solder joints afterwards. It's like a natural reaction. Anyway, I know you're not meant to. Now, I've snipped the live side of this away because we're not going to use it, but on negative side, we've got this leg hanging through. But if we go back to our drawing, we can see there's a link actually between tags 3 and 4 on our drawing. So why not use this leg to connect them two tags together? And all I'm going to do is just bend it round so it touches the bottom of this tag, and then snip it off, tidy it up, and then I'll just solder that in. That way I don't have to use another component to run over this side. It'll just be there like so. And there is all of our components added to the board apart from, of course, the most important one, the transistor. For the transistor for this one, we want an NPN transistor, not a PNP. PNP is positive, negative, positive. So if we take our transistor and imagine these legs, if this one was positive, this one was negative, and this one was positive, that would be PNP. Now NPN would be negative, positive, negative. It doesn't matter, but NPN generally is used for negative ground effects, which is what we want, because we want to use this with a regular power supply. Now, the transistor that I'm using today is an OC140 from Mullard. These are great NPN germanium transistors, and they're getting a bit expensive now. This one also has the added benefit, and I've not seen one that's been marked twice before, of having the CV7112 marking on it. Now the CV markings usually denote that they are military spec, especially when it comes to Philips and Mullard. I've read online some conflicting opinions on this, where people say it's not military spec, it's just a different marking or whatever. But my experience is that every transistor I've seen in single packets in the military has come with a CV denotation on the packet. So, you know, CV7001 I think is like an OC44 or something like that. Now, in my experience, that makes it military. What's the difference? Well, I imagine they took the top 10% or something like that, performance transistors, and made them the military ones, or there was different specs to them, so they're set to a higher standard. And in my experience, the military spec ones handle heat and are generally within spec much more than the normal ones. So let's put it to the test. Here's our Atlas DCA55 transistor tester. Lots of people always tell me that there's better ways of testing them. Great, whatever. This is really convenient and I like using it, so I'm going to keep using it. I've attached it to the legs of our transistor. Now you're going to make sure that they're not touching each other, otherwise you'll just get a short. Turn it on and it's going to give us some readings. And for a change, I've actually put a new battery in it. So it's telling us that it's an NPN germanium transistor. Great, that's what we want. It's given us our pin out, so it tells us what the collector, emitter and base are. So we can get it orientated. This is the key actually. We can orientate it the right way around on a circuit. Beforehand, I used to search on Google and find what the pinouts were for transistors, and you can never be certain. You just can't. And sometimes you build a pedal, it wouldn't work, and it's because you got the pinout wrong. Maybe it's labelled up wrong, the dot's in the wrong place, whatever, it doesn't matter. So I like to be able to tell. Current gain, HFE. Now that tells us how strong this transistor is, how much it's going to put out. That's at 78. That's bang on. 70 to 120 is what people say for Rangemaster treble boosters. So 78, low gain NPN. I'm happy with that. And we keep going through. Because this is a germanium, we need to know what the leakage is. Now anything less than 0.1, so 100 microamps, 100 microamps, I think it's 100 microamps is good. But as we can see on this one, leakage current is 0, not a single thing. That is absolutely amazing. A unicorn, in fact. What a transistor. So this is pretty thin, I think. So if we go through, we can see that the red is our collector. So that is going to go on our circuit, if we look at our drawing, on the left-hand side. The base is the blue one, which is the center. And the green is the emitter, which is this side. So that means that we don't have to cross any of the legs over because we have collector, base, emitter, just like our drawing. That's perfect. So I know it's orientated this way round, and it goes in the last 3 tags on our board, which is these 3, if I can squeeze it in there. There. And what I like to do is bend the center leg over and solder that in place. And then you can adjust the transistor to sit straight. And also what it does is it stops you from being tempted into soldering the rest of the legs all in one go. And the reason for that is germanium transistors are really affected by heat. You should use a heatsink. Someone's going to tell me off for not using a heatsink, I know, but whatever. And a little bit of time in between soldering each leg isn't going to do it any harm. So there's that. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the other 2 legs soldered in, and we're ready to mount this into our enclosure. Can't believe we got all the way through this video without showing the enclosure. So I'm going to be using this. It's a bent enclosure, bent aluminium, my standard triangular shaped ones with the centre foot switch. Cheers, Mr. Craze Fandango. I'm sure you'll like this one, even though I'm sure he prefers the off-centre more. Anyway, I've actually covered this in Hello Sailor fabric. It's a silk fabric. It's got the Banksy Rocks motif on it. I'm a massive Banksy fan, as people I'm sure are aware. Now, I'd love to know, do you guys prefer the nitrocellulose covered pedals, aged and stuff like that, or do you prefer the bent aluminium pedals with the fabric covering them? Be interested to know in the comments what you really like. Now, you may notice that the FAL Treble Booster has no controls on it, and yet I've got 2 holes here. Now, we know one hole's going to be for our switch, so then we can control the EQ and make it, you know, a bit more versatile. Now, the other control is going to be for the pre-gain. So it's not going to be a volume, it's going to be a way of cleaning up the pedal without messing about with your guitar's volume, so you can dial it in, rather than adding a volume control on output, because putting it through a volume on the output may really affect the tone, because you're introducing a point of ground after the circuit. And I think, maybe, but this is just going to add some resistance on the input of the circuit, just like using your guitar's volume. So it'd be interesting to see. I'm using a 50k audio pot for this. We may adjust that later on, but let's see. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and get all of this mounted in the enclosure. There's all of our hardware mounted onto the enclosure, ready to go. Next, I'm going to wire up the actual board itself. I like to start in the top left corner, and as it happens, the top left tag is the only tag on the top row that has a solder connection or a wire coming out of it. And that does indeed go to the output, which is going to be this pin here on our 3-pole double throw switch. Now, these first wires are important because it informs where our wiring loom is going to go. And as you guys know, I love a good wiring loom. So from this tag here, which is our top left tag, I'm going to run a wire round here to the back here, and then up through a little ponytail like I normally like to do, and to this tagboard, to this to this tag here on our 3-pole double throw switch. There we can see we have our wire going to our 3-pole double throw switch, but I haven't soldered it in yet. And the reason being is we're going to add an anti-pop resistor. Now, some of you will know that if you're using true bypass pedals, sometimes when you press this switch and it connects it all up, you get a pop sound.
It's noisy.
Now, what is that pop? Capacitors pass through AC signal. So our AC sine wave that we're so fond of, and when we strum our chord, it makes an AC sine wave because noise is AC. It doesn't allow DC signal through. So our 9 volts DC that goes into the pedal can't get back out again as DC because the capacitors block the DC from coming through. Okay, so capacitors allow AC through, but they don't allow DC through. However, because we live in an imperfect world, most capacitors, if not all, leak some DC through them because they're not perfect. So what happens is, between our output cap and our switch, while the pedal is off but there's still power going to it, slowly the 9 volts will leach through our capacitor and into this wire here connected to the switch, but it can't go anywhere because the switch isn't connected to the output, so it goes nowhere, and it just builds up and builds up. And then when you stomp on your switch, that voltage has to go somewhere, and it goes through the signal, and we hear it as a pop. And now the way to get rid of this is to add in a 1 meg resistor, which is so big that we won't hear the difference. But that 1 meg resistor going to ground, and what happens is, as the voltage slowly bleeds through DC through our capacitor, this resistor just allows that voltage to go through it and straight to ground. And that way, when we stomp on our switch, there's no voltage there to shoot through our signal, and there's no pop. And we call it an anti-pop resistor. I like to put them on the input and the output of my treble booster circuits, just because the treble booster is such a finicky pedal that every last little component makes a difference, and some of the old components that I use do pass a little bit of DC. Now I know I get a lot of hate in the comments for using old components, and if I use brand new off the shelf ones, this would be less prevalent, but then the mojo would be missing. Prove me wrong. So I'm going to add in, I know that this pin here is going to be our earth connection. We're going to run that to our negative rail in a minute. So I'm going to run from the input, which is this pin here, and the output, which is this pin here. I'm going to add in 2 1 meg resistors going straight to ground, and that way our input and output have a 1 meg reference to ground, so we won't get any of that DC leaching through our circuit and through our capacitors. Usually I mount these on the board, but this board, as you've seen, we designed this tag board before from an old circuit, so I'm just going to mount them on this switch. As you will have no doubt seen from countless of my other videos if you've watched them. If not, what are you playing at? Watch all my videos. I like to twist the legs together of components like this. Call it the helicopter method. Now someone suggested in the comments of my last video, instead of soldering and then snipping, why don't I snip then solder? Well, I don't know. So let's try it out. Let's give it a snip and then give it a solder. Seems to me that way works just as well, and so if anyone wanted to do it that way round, you absolutely can. And there's our 2 resistors in place. That's the output fully wired up. Our input wire will go in here, and then we'll also run an earth from this connection here, and that'll earth out our LED eventually. Next up, we're going to wire up the input. Now, instead of the input going straight to our input, the end of this cap, second tag along on the bottom, we're going to put it through our pot first. So our input wire is going to come from our pot, which, you know, let's add that in now. So we'll tin it, and then I'm going to follow the same wiring loom because, well, you know what I'm like over having one wiring loom. It's going to go into the pot there. If I can get it to stay in, well done, Joe. Just going to snip off the excess. Now, the pin 3 of the pot is going to go to our input. It's going to follow the same loom, so then when we add 7,000 cable ties in there, they're going to look the same. And then it's going to come up and go into the input up here. Pin 2 of our pre-game pot, it's not a volume pot, it's a pre-game pot. Pin 2 is going to go to the input of our circuit, and all that does is it adds in a variable resistor on the input of our circuit, which is going to make the signal get stronger or weaker going into the circuit itself, which means that we're going to get either a cleaner or a dirtier sound. Right, next up, I'm just going to run a wire down the same wiring loom into pin 2 of the input. We also want to add another wire coming from our input to go round, following the same wiring loom, and go to one of the center lugs of our switch, our double pole, double throw switch for our input cap. So I'm going to run a wire from the input where we've just been, right the way round, and go to this pin right here in the center of our double pole, double throw switch. There we have our input wire coming from pin 2 of our pre-game pot, going right the way round and hitting our input of our circuit, which is just there. And then we have another wire coming out and going round the back of this wiring loom up here and going to our double pole, double throw switch to pin 2 on the left hand side of that. Now the other side of this switch is going to go to the other side of this capacitor, which we can see on our drawing is tag 3 on the top row. So tag 3 on the top row is going to have another wire going to the other side of this. Next is going to be our negative, and on our drawing we can see it's the last 2 pins on the last 2 tags, sorry, on the left hand side at the bottom. These are our negative, and I'm going to run them round the back here. They're going to come up and attach to this negative point here for our input and for our LED, and then it's going to come out and come round and go to our 9-volt DC jack, the negative pin right here, and that is going to connect to both negatives on our jacks. Now that our if's all sorted out, we're going to move on to the live side of things. Now the live is these two pins here on our DC jack. I'm just going to run a wire through and join them together because there's no battery snap in my pedals. I'll run the live round this wire and loom here, round the back, and it'll come up and attach to our bottom left tag, which is our 9-volt tag. That is the only live we're going to run here. Normally I'll run a filtered in line there, which I've shown in previous videos. However, because this is an old circuit, I'm just going to run it as it is. And I know it's not meant to run off a DC power supply. It's meant to run off a battery. Whatever, this is the way I'm going to do it for this one. So I'll run a wire round now. Now that our live's wired in, the last thing to do is to wire up our input and output from our jacks. And they'll run down the same wire and loom, of course, through our makeshift ponytail, which I do love. And then into these pins here. This is the input and this is the output. And then I'll add in that little loop between this pin here and this pin here, which will be our bypass signal. Next on the cards is going to be wiring up our double pole double throw switch. Now, as you may have noticed previously, I've put that switch damn close to the jack, and there's only a tiny bit of clearance between the top of where our input jack's going to come in and the top of our switch. So what I'm going to have to do is, for the 22 NF cap, which is going to be our mid boost setting, I can probably squeeze that in at the front here, that's fine. But when it comes to our larger 100 NF, I'm actually going to use this, which is a 80 NF cap. So it will be 86.8 NF in total. I'm going to mount that over here on a tag and run wires round to this switch, just because then I haven't got this big cap hanging about at the back here. For this large cap, what I'm going to do is mount it onto a tag board. To do that, what I'm going to do is remove the two center tags, if you like, because they're just going to get in the way. Now I can run that straight down through these holes here, and then we can run wires coming out of there. So first things first, I'm going to clean the ends as ever using my Nifx snips. Then I'm going to point the standard pointing upwards because I think it looks cool. You should really have the voltage rating, which is 200 volts if anyone's interested, pointing upwards, but I'm not doing that. I'm putting the standard going up because I think it looks better. And then we can mount that sitting on there kind of evenly like that. We bend the legs out and just solder it on the bottom, and that'll sit in place perfectly. All I'm going to do now is stick this to my tag board, into my pedal. I could put it next to the tag board here or down here. I think I'm going to go right next to the tag board here, and then I'll just run the wires round through the gap up here and straight to the switch on the very top end. I may have to snip off the top of these the lugs on this switch, but I'm hoping I don't have to. Last but not least is the negative side of our LED, and that's going to go to this, a 4.7k resistor that's coming out the back of our switch. Now this really only needs to connect to the center pin of the switch. However, I'm going to connect it to both of them just because they're there. You don't have to. And what I like to do is just feed it through the back of these two pins and then solder them in. Should really, I always say this, I should really leave one of them, this back one here, unsoldered to show that I'm using gold pins on my Stomp switch, but I don't. Now the next bit is to run a wire round this wire and loom to our resistor. This is our current limiting resistor, so I'm using 4.7k here, but you could use 10k, you could use 1k, it just depends on how bright you want to make it. And I have seen people use trim pots or potentiometers, so then people can vary how bright they want their LED. A lot of performing guitarists tell me that they don't like it too bright because it blinds them on stage. I don't have that problem because A, I'm rubbish at playing guitar, and B, I don't play live, so it's kind of hard for me to judge. But 4.7k seems like the middle ground. I haven't done it so the LED is poking through, like shining through the fabric on this one. When I do them ones, I tend to go for a lower value resistor so the LED's brighter to try and shine through. But this one's got an LED bezel, so I don't need to worry about that. Now let's roll that round and connect it on there. I'm really getting into the fabric print, or designing new printed fabrics or leatherettes for my pedals. I'm not too sure whether you guys like it or not, but it's a rabbit hole I'm going through at the minute. I started off with leatherettes, then I went to sort of like a jean material, and now I'm onto silk. Who knows? I'm tempted to try lycra or something like that, but I don't know. We'll see what people think of these. I'm also quite excited to hear how this sounds. I mean, I'm certainly not going to be playing anything close to Ritchie Blackmore in the demo. Now I'm going to go ahead and get some cable ties in here and tidy all this snake's wedding up, and then we'll get on to biasing our transistor. Okay, so what we've got is our pedal plugged in, input this side, output this side, because of course the pedal's upside down. We have 9 volts coming into our jack, our DC jack. I've plugged it into my 1977 hardtail Strat. This is going to be for biasing the transistor. Now we're going to bias it on this pot here. What we could do is use our voltage. Now usually in a range master that's between 6 and 7 volts on the collector, which is the second pin along on the top row, to earth, and try and bias it to 6 to 7 volts. Fine, great. However, I'm unsure of this circuit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my guitar into my Filmo sound converted to a Tweed Deluxe amp. That's that. It's in bypass. I'm going to turn the pedal on, and then I'm just going to pluck a few strings because the guitar's well out of tune, and adjust the bias pot until we find the sweet spot. So there's it on. And now if I adjust the bias pot while that's ringing out, it gets worse. So about there. Right, now we've found the sweet spot. What we can do is, if I get rid of the guitar and turn the amp off, what we can do now is check and see what that is voltage wise, and whether it is the same as the range master or not. And each transistor really is a little bit different, so some of them work better at different voltages, and it's always better to dial it by ear. But 6 to 7 volts on a range master is a good guide. We put our negative side, or black side, to earth, and then this pin, well, in fact if I put it there, here we'll be able to see it better, won't we? Put this pin to the collector, which is our second pin along. Let's get that out of the way there, and we can see that we've got 3.6 volts, 3.689 volts. So that is what our transistor sounds best at to my ears. When you're dialing it in, you can kind of hear the note open up, and then if you keep going it'll close off and disappear, but that open bit is the best sounding that you're going to make your pedal anyway. Well, that's what I'm getting there. What I'm going to do now is I'll stow all this, and then we'll go on to finding out what type of knobs we're going to use with this one. So this is our pedal ready for a knob, and this is our pre-gain. Which would you choose out of these 4? So first up we've got this Bakelite with a little pointer on it. I quite like these, and it's probably my preference on this pedal, although I don't think other people would choose that, but this is definitely my preference. Or we have one from our Rat mod not too long ago. Not really my sort of thing. You know, it's a bit odd looking and they feel quite plasticky. Ooh, and now I've just dropped it on the floor. Well done, Joe. Or we have a metal Telecaster style knob. I like how this one looks with this pedal, but because there's only one knob, I don't know, it looks a bit odd. It's quite big, unsure. And then the other contender for me is the white cupcake. Kind of fits in with the Mario theme. We have red on our DC jack, which goes with the red writing and Mario's cap. We have blue on our LED bezel, which goes with Mario's blue top. And then white would really go with the policeman here. I don't know, what would you choose? Please let me know in the comments. And now for the sound sample. I know this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Have I been able to resurrect this legendary circuit? Well, let's find out. First of all, you're going to hear this circuit with my TC Electronics wire tap. Now, I know that this is a digital effect, but what you need to know is that I use a transformer to mimic a guitar's pickups. So then this pedal's going to see the impedance of guitar's pickups. And I know someone's going to write in the comments that, you know, I'm doing it wrong or whatever. Fine. Please write it in there and I'll say this again. After that, you're going to hear some absolutely horrific playing from yours truly. Please forgive me, I'm much more of an engineer than a guitarist. And for all of those who are about to say the hum in the background, I know, I need to sort that out and I'm working on it. Please put your suggestions in the comments of how I can get rid of the hum in my recording process using the Captain X. Now, let's hear how it sounds. If you enjoyed this video of me making an FAL Treble Booster, you're going to really love this video where I try and make a Gary Clark Jr. Zen Drive.